Let's start building a new processing tool. So the way to start a new script is from the processing toolbox. We have the scripts tab here. You can click here. It says create a new script. We can click this. It opens the blank editor. I can type my code. And this script will be interpreted by the processing API. So you have to write it in a way that the processing API understands it. Instead of starting from scratch, I recommend using the template. So you can use this template or just take any other processing script that you find and use this as a template. Let's start from this template and see this. So you can see there's some already code here. I'm going to go through this and modify it to make it our own code. I'm going to go through the entire process step by step, explain what happens with each line of code, and then you can try this on your own. So this is code here. I'm going to remove the documentation from here. So this is the documentation. You can add this, but just to make the code simpler, remove the documentation from here. So you can see we are creating a new class. Here the template says example processing algorithm. It inherits from this base class called QGIS processing algorithm, and all processing algorithms must inherit that. So this knows how to create your dialog boxes and drop down and all of that. There are some methods here. It says how to translate. Well, this is the translation it uses. If your QGIS is in different language, it'll automatically translate those strings. We have this function here, create instance. This will be called by the processing API to create your tool, create the dialog. And this has to be the same name as your class name. So let's just change our class name. I'm going to change my class name to be, let's just save attributes algorithm. This is what I want to name my class. It could be anything. And just say I want to name this. And this name has to be changed here. So when the processing API says I want to create this dialog box for this particular tool, it's going to call this method and it's going to say, yeah, this is the class name for this thing. Name. What is the name of this algorithm? This is the ID. Remember when you hover over any tool, it says algorithm ID. This is the name of the tool that will be displayed here. I'm just going to name this as save attributes. Should not have spaces. It has to be just with underscore. Display name. This is the longer name that will be displayed in the toolbox. So this is the longer name that users will see. I'll just say save attributes as CSV. So that's the name of the tool that the users will see. Group. You can group your scripts. By default, all the scripts will be here. You can group them with different folder names. If you skipped it, it's not going to create a group. So it's fine. We don't skip the group and group ID. Short help string, this is the documentation. So if you want to tell users how to use your tool, you can describe it here. So we'll just name it as this tool saves the selected vector layer as CSV. Okay, we have init algorithm. This is the class that will create the inputs that we need. We're going to delete everything from here. We will do this later on. Okay, I'll just make it pass. So pass is a placeholder in Python. Let's say I'll fill this later. Let the method just exist. Process algorithm, again, this one is also, we're going to delete everything from here and also make it pass. So I've filled all the boilerplate code. Let's see what happens when I run this. I get a dialog box. So when the user runs a script, this is what they get. Amazing, right? I just named the class and I just named the algorithm name and I get a dialog box. This looks like your processing tool because the base class knows how to construct this. You can see there's a log, you have a parameter, you have a progress bar, you can run this as a batch process, you have all those advanced functionality that users use. You have the name of the tool and the documentation right here. When I run this, nothing happens, right? Because I've not implemented what happens. But we have a dialog box that was created by our new script. I'm going to open up this link here. This are linked from your course material. These are some of the useful documentation link. We need to know documentation for the QGIS processing algorithm class, and we need the QGIS processing parameter definition class. Our tool, we need to have two inputs. One is let the user select the vector layer that they want. So they'll pick the vector layer just the way you do it in QGIS. And then we need one output where we'll say what is the destination of your CSV file. So let's write this. And the input and outputs should be configured in this init algorithms. We need to specify what is the type of input we need. So QGIS has many different kinds of inputs. All of those input classes, you can see it here. This is a class QGIS processing parameter definition. And you can see there's a huge list of classes. Each of this is a type of input. If you want just to pick a CRS, you need to give this as your input, QGIS processing parameter CRS. If you want your users to pick a vector layer, you can say QGIS processing parameter vector layer, pick a vector layer. So you figure out what input makes sense for your tool. Most of the time you need to pick one or more layers, some parameters like what's length or what's the number of things that you want to do. You can pick the things that you need. This supports all the different inputs that you need in QGIS. We need a vector layer, so we can specify QGIS processing parameter vector layer. If you just are using vector layer to read features, a much easier way to specify would be to specify that as source. So there is a QGIS processing parameter feature source. This is the class that we mentioned that allows you to read a vector layer for one feature at a time. If you just have a vector layer, you can use that instead. So instead of getting a layer object, you get a feature source, which you can read the objects from it easily. So let's just specify this as our class. So I want this as my class. Make sure we have imported this. So we've already imported the feature source here, and we need to initialize this class. So you can see this needs some parameters. What is the name of the parameter? We'll say this will be our input. We'll just say some description, input layer. And the third parameter, let's just do it this for now. Let's see what happens. So we'll just say I have this parameter. I want to add it to my processing algorithm. We need to say self.add parameter. And this will go in and configure a new parameter, which will allow users to select a vector layer. Let's run our tool and see. You can see now we have this dialog box here. One line of code, we got this, and you can see it has only vector layers, which allows the users to go and pick a vector layer. This also has a built-in validation. So we can specify the type of layer that you want. So we say, let the user pick only, let's say a line layer, not any other type of layer. So we can specify in the QGIS processing class, we have some of the, let's go to the documentation, go to the QGIS processing class. This has some constants that I can use to specify what kind of layer that I want to select. Do I want users to pick only a vector layer or maybe a line layer or a polygon layer? So let's say I want users to pick only a line layer. So I say, let the user pick only the type vector line. Now, when I run this tool, you can see I can only pick streets. I cannot even pick other layers. So this has a built-in validation, so you can specify what the user wants. In our case, we are saving attributes of the particular layer. We can just say type vector any. So we don't care about what's the geometry type. You can just say pick any vector layer, but it has to have, just any vector layer is fine. So you can see now I'm able to pick all the layers. So this is one parameter. Let's set our output parameter. We'll say self.add the output parameter, QGIS processing parameter. What do we want as an output? We want a CSV file. So we can specify my parameter as to be a file destination. So this is the class that allows to select a file on the disk that will be created. Let's specify all the parameters. What's the name of the parameter? Output, the description, output CSV. The third parameter is a filter that you can specify to say what is the type of file that you want. And I can say this has to be just CSV files, star.csv. This will allow the users to only write CSV files in their class. Done. So we have our two parameters. Okay, I got an error because I have not imported this class in my script. So make sure whenever you are writing a new class, you import it. And now when I run this, you can see my tool looks like this. I can select some layer. I can now go and save it to a file. And when I go to save it as a file, I can only save it as a .csv file. Right? This is kind of, again, built into your processing API. So nice. Now the user doesn't need to learn the user interface. They already know. Right? Everybody's used the processing tool, so they can know how to use this. Again, when I run this, nothing happens because I've not configured what happens. So this is how we have configured our inputs. You can add as many inputs as possible. You can build any complicated tool. You can use any of the inputs that are supported by the processing toolbox. We need to define our process algorithm. So the process algorithms always should return a dictionary. It should have all the outputs we generated. What is the output this algorithm is generating? Well, we are generating this output. And what is the current output where we have not generated it, but we'll replace this with the actual output that we generated from our code. So process algorithm must always return a dictionary of the outputs you generated using this. When you click run button, you'll be passed saying that users configured the parameters, go and use them. Let's see what does this parameter contains. So I'm going to print the parameters and run the tool. So I'm going to run this tool. Before that, let me just save the script. Always a good idea to save the script. So I'm going to save it as save attributes to. I already have a previous one. So let's run this. And you can say I have configured this as blocks. And I'm going to say I want to save it to this file as test.csv. Okay. Let me run this. You can see what did the processing tools print. What was the parameter values? So you can see my script. I printed the parameters. The parameters I had input and output. The input contains the ID of the layer that the user selected, and output contains the path to that CSV file. So now I can say, this is the layer that the user picked, go do something with it. Similarly, if I go and run this tool again and say, oh, I want to select a parcels layer and have a temporary output. I run this, you can see my parameters now contain the reference to the parcels layer and a temporary output. So this is what you get in your code when you process your algorithm. You have all the information to process this data, right? We say, I have the parameters, let me process this and return a dictionary of the output that I processed. It is useful. So for example, you get an ID of the layer. Now, how do I use the ID to iterate over features? It's much easier for me to just say, let me just get a layer object instead of a layer ID. So the processing API comes with some helper functions that allow you to say, I have some parameters, give me the whatever configure parameter as a specific object. Those are configured in the QGIS processing algorithm class. You can say, we have all these methods, parameters as color, parameter as CRS, parameter as enum, parameter as file, parameter as layer. So if you have a layer and say, just give me a layer, I want to get a QGIS layer object, I'll just use this. If I want to get the layer as maybe a source, I can use this. So you can just say what you want to convert the configured parameter to a specific object, you can use those methods. Let's see what changes when we do this. So I'm going to just say, I'm going to use this method self parameter as vector layer. I want to read this, the input layer, blocks, parcels, etc., what the user is configured as a vector layer. So we can say, I have all the parameters from this, give me the value of the input layer and save it as a vector layer. So now I'll save it as a layer. Let's print this and see what happened. I'm going to also print the parameters. Run this. So you can see the original parameters contained just the reference to the selected layer and temporary output. But now my layer object is actually a QGIS vector layer object. It just converted this layer ID into this object. And this is what this line does. Really helpful functions to be able to convert whatever the user selected into a specific object that you can work with. Similarly, we can just say, I want to take the output layer and we'll just say, I want to take this parameter as file output. I just want the file name that the user configured. And since it's a file output, you'll just get a path to that. Let's run this and test. So you can see now we have this layer object that the user selected and a path to the actual CSV file that will be created. So these are the helper methods to convert the selected parameters into a specific object. This is also the recommended way to develop these algorithms. Don't do everything at once. Create something, print the output, see if it worked. And that will allow you to kind of do things in a more structured manner. Now we have a layer and we have an output file. Well, I know exactly how to process this. So let me just copy some code from the previous script. So I know I have my layer, I'll get the feature count, and I will go and create a file object. This is from the previous script that we have done. So we have the QGIS file writer. I need to import that as well. I need the other class. We have the writer, and we'll just say for in layer.get features writer. And now we have our output layer that we have created. We just say return this output. Done. Let's see if this works. So we run this. QGIS project not defined. We forgot to import that. In this processing, you need to import every object that you import. So let's configure this and run this. Let's try this and see if this works. And you can see it created a CSV file. So I had some input and it created a CSV file. Let me test this. So I'm going to save this on the desktop as a test.csv and run this. I'll get my test.csv. Okay, it worked. So now I'm able to take the code, package it into a processing script that is able to do this. One of the things that we can do is we can display a progress bar. When we have a large layer and we want to see the progress, this processing algorithms can also display the progress bar. Let's learn how to do the progress bar. We have the total feature count. As we are processing the data, we can say, as you have the process each feature, you need to increment the progress by 1. So if we have 100 features, as we process one feature, we'll increment it by 1%, and we'll continue doing this. When we are iterating, we can get the index of the feature that we are processing using this enumerate function. You can put enumerate on any iterator in Python, and you get the index of that particular feature when you are iterating. So when we are processing the first one, the index will be 0, second will be 2 and 1, and so on. So we'll say my progress is the index divided by total. So if I had 1,000 features, I'm processing first one, I'm processed 1 out of 1,000. And we'll just set it to an integer. So this will be our progress, and we'll multiply by 100. So this is the progress percentage. The progress is always in percentage. And we can say f.set progress to be progress. And this will allow us to see the progress. We are now ready to see how does this script behave with our parsers layer. So let's run this and try this. We're going to try this on the parsers layer, which is a very large one. And you can see now I get this progress bar. As we're iterating, we are updating the progress bar and say, update it with the index that we have passed on. This will also run in the background. If I close this, you can see it keeps running in the background. We still have one more problem. Let's say I did something wrong. I want to cancel it. It's not canceling because we're not coded to cancel this. So when we are processing something large, we have this cancel option. We need to code what happens when the user presses the cancel button. So let's do that next. This will allow us to cancel the process halfway if we made a mistake. This is once it finishes, we'll go and see how to code the cancel button. When we're iterating, we'll always say when you're starting the next iteration, we'll say if feedback dot is canceled. This is the signal that we called when the user presses this cancel button. Say if the feedback is canceled, break, stop the loop. And this allows us to cancel. Now go back and run this. Let's select our parsers layer, run it. We get our progress, and now see what happens when I press cancel. Immediately cancels. And this is how you communicate with the user. You can also code cancel. There are also other options like feedback.error, display error, push error, or some other functions of that. So you can display some error messages or display some information messages to the user. So look at the PyQGIS feedback class for other options that are available to you to communicate with the user. Here we have this QGIS processing feedback class. Let's just use this here. We have some info, so push info. So let's just use this. So we can do something like this. Feedback.push info starting to process layer. Okay. And you can put one more. So let's say you have some process which might be time consuming. It may be immediate, it may take a long time. You can just display this message. Okay, I'm stuck on doing something. And that will display when the user runs this tool. So let's run this. So you can say starting to process layer. And it's processing. Once it's done, it'll display processing done. Right? All of you can try going to the section 11.3. Let's create the script. Go ahead and create a new script in your processing toolbox copy the code that is given here and create a new script. Once you create the script, make sure to save it. If you save it as the default location, this will be inside of your profile. They'll always load when QGIS starts. So this is a way to have the script always available to you, and it'll be there in the processing toolbox. Once you run it, once you save it, go ahead and run this. And now you can select any layer, see if it works, go and save to some file on your machine, select one of the layers and see if you're able to process this data and save that with data.